ومن أظلم ممن منع مساجد الله أن يذكر فيها اسمه وسعى في خرابها أولئك ما كان لهم أن يدخلوها إلا خائفين لهم في الدنيا خزي ولهم في الآخرة عذاب عظيم
যে ব্যক্তি আল্লাহর মসজিদ সমূহে তাঁর নাম উচ্চারণ করতে বাধা দেয় এবং সেগুলোকে উজাড় করতে চেষ্টা করে, তার চেয়ে বড় জালিম আর কি। এদের পক্ষে মসজিদ সমূহে প্রবেশ করা বিধেয় নয়, অবশ্য ভীত সন্ত্রস্ত অবস্থায়। ওদের জন্য ইহকালে লাঞ্ছনা এবং পরকালে কঠিন শাস্তি রয়েছে।
আসসালামু আলাইকুম ওয়া রাহমাতুল্লাহি ওয়া বারাকাতুহু। আউযু বিল্লাহি মিনাশ শাইতানির রাজীম। ومن أظلم ممن منع مساجد الله أن يذكر فيها اسمه وسعى في خرابها أولئك ما كان لهم أن يدخلوها إلا خائفين لهم في الدنيا خزي ولهم في الآخرة عذاب عظيم ولله المشرق والمغرب فأينما تولوا فثم وجه الله إن الله واسع عليم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي فالحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. We spoke already about ayah number 113 where Allah spoke about the Jews and the Christians and them blaming or putting the fingers of blame on each other. And Allah then saying, كَذَلِكَ قَالَ الَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ مِثْلَ قَوْلِهِمْ. And this is the same kind of thing that people that have no knowledge say, just like them. And so Allah will make a decision between them on Judgment Day, فِيمَا كَانُوا فِيهِ يَخْتَلِفُونَ, in whatever they used to disagree with each other in. But now, remember, three groups were mentioned. Those three groups were the Jews, the Christians, and then Allah didn't specify the third group. He just said, just like those who don't have knowledge, they say this too. So it was essentially three groups that were kind of alluded to, two explicitly and one implicitly. Kind of a description was given without a name to them, people without knowledge. Now one hint towards that is, of course, that the people that had books with them are considered people of knowledge, which is Jews and Christians. And the mushrikun of Makkah were not people of books, nor of reading and writing much. So they were considered the other, those who don't know, which is why the word ummiyin is used for them also, the unlettered. الَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ, those who have no knowledge. So it's kind of alluding to the Makkans in that sense. But then that ishara, that pointing becomes explicit in the next ayah. And look how it's getting closer and closer to being explicit. Allah says, وَمَنْ أَظْلَمْ, who could be a worse wrongdoer, مِمَّنْ مَنَعَ مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ, than the one who forbade from the masajid of Allah, the houses of worship. By the way, masjid in Arabic, ism dharf, is a place where sajda is done. Masjid and sajda have the same origin. So it's the place and the time of sajda actually. So masjid is the place where you do sajda, which is of course the masjid. And also the time at which you do sajda is also called masjid. Because an ism dharf in Arabic is a place and a time. So min mana'a masajid Allah has two implications actually. One, the one who forbids people from entering or being able to utilize the houses of Allah, the masajid of Allah, so they could do sajda to Allah in those houses. And the second is actually they forbid people from specific times that they would have done sajda. And the most popular time to do sajda is the Hajj, where the masses of people, the masjid is the fullest, especially the house of Allah, and the most sajda is done then. So it's alluding not just on the one hand to the act of sajda and the location of masajid, but even the Hajj itself. And why is this important? Because the Muslims have just been expelled from Makkah, and if they go back and try to make Hajj, etc., it's very difficult, if not impossible, for them to do so, because they have enemies over there. So now Allah is alluding to that, saying, who could be a worse wrongdoer than the one who forbids from the masajid of Allah? But notice it's plural, masajid, which means it includes not just al-Masjid al-Haram, which is the original masjid, but all masajid. So it's still in that sense a little bit more general. فَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ مِمَّنْ مَنَعَ مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ أَنْ يُذْكَرَ فِيهَا اسْمُهُ, that his name should be mentioned in it. That his name should be mentioned in it. And here we learn by this kind of context the fundamental purpose of the masjid. Dhikru ismillah. Dhikru ismillah. The fundamental purpose of the masjid is to remember the name of Allah, to remember Allah. And this is talked about a few places in the Quran. في بيوت أذن الله أن يذكر فيها اسمه. In homes in which Allah has given permission that His name should be mentioned, that He should be remembered. Right? So this idea of like salah is even the remembrance of Allah's name. It begins with even Allahu Akbar, Al-Fatiha, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Mumtali, as-salat mumtali'ah, Bismillah. It's full of the name of Allah. Right? So this idea of forbidding the remembrance of Allah, أن يذكر فيها اسمه وسعى في خرابها. And who could be a worse wrongdoer that number one, forbids people from the masajid of Allah, that His name be mentioned in it. And second, he makes efforts in corrupting them. Not only does he stop people from coming to them, well, if he's stopping them from coming to them, he's in control of them. And what does he want to do? He makes efforts towards their corruption. وَسَعَى فِي خَرَابِهَا أُولَٰئِكَ مَا كَانَ لَهُمْ. These people, there's nothing appropriate for them whatsoever. It is not becoming for them except أَن يَدْخُلُوهَا إِلَّا خَائِفِينَ, that they should enter the masajid, them, except in states of fear. These kinds of people, all they deserve is that they should be the ones entering the masjids in a state of fear. Why? Because actually in the context of the seerah, they inflicted fear, they induced fear onto the believers from entering the houses of Allah. And Allah is saying it should be the other way around. They should be the ones afraid to enter the house of Allah because of the crimes they've committed against His houses. لَهُمْ فِي الدُّنْيَا خِزْيٌ. For them in this world there is humiliation. So Allah is already alluding to the fact that the people who have done that, in the seerah's case the Quraysh, even in dunya, humiliation is about to come for them. So it's kind of a clue towards the Fath of Makkah. وَلَهُمْ فِي الْآخِرَةِ عَذَابٌ عَظِيمٌ. And in the akhirah they have enormous or great punishment also, especially for them. وَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ مِمَّنْ مَنَعَ مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ. This is early Madani surah, like I mentioned, most of this surah is early Madani. And in this time, of course, the Jews and Christians, the Muslims are coming into contact with the Jewish and the Christian community. The focus, of course, in Baqarah is the Jewish community. The focus in Ali Imran will be the Christian community. But at the same time, we shouldn't forget that there's a third party which the Messenger ﷺ was first in contact with, who still have their animosity towards Allah's Messenger. Those are the Quraysh. So now you've got three groups of people. The Jews, the Christians, and the Mushrikun. Now Allah reminds us of those two groups, but He also takes us back to the third group, which is the Mushrikun. And He says about them, وَمَنْ أَظْلَمُ. Who could be more of a wrongdoer? مِمَّنْ مَنَعَ مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ. Than the one who forbade the masajid of Allah, meaning forbade people from going to the houses of Allah. أَنْ مَنَعَ مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ أَنْ يُذْكَرَ فِي اسْمُهُ وَسَعَى فِي خَرَابِهَا. That Allah's name should be mentioned in them, and they made efforts to corrupt them. Now Allah didn't just specifically talk, even though most Mufassirun say these ayat are hinting towards the Kaaba, and the mushrikun stopping the Muslims from coming to the Kaaba, and then putting idols in there, therefore causing corruption in them. But Allah, interestingly, in the ayah didn't say Masjid Allah. He said Masajid Allah. What's Masajid? Plural, it's all masjids. Allah is saying, who could be a worse person than the one who forbids people from going to the houses of Allah? Forbids the masajid of Allah. And interestingly, the maf'ul bihi is not mentioned. Forbids who? Allah doesn't say, مَنَعَ النَّاسَ أَنْ يَذْهَبُوا أَنْ يَزُورُوا مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ. He forbids people from going to the masjids of Allah. The phrase literally says, forbids the masjid of Allah. What that implies is it forbids people from going to the masjid. What that also implies is that the person forbids the masjid from doing what it's supposed to do. The masjid has certain functions. It's supposed to be able to do certain things. And this person makes sure that the masjid does not get to do those things. مَنْ مَنَعَ مَسَاجِدَ اللَّهِ. It's as though Allah is saying the masjid itself wants to do an act, and this person is forbidding that act. Right? Now what are the acts that this person forbids? أَنْ يُذْكَرَ فِي اسْمُهُ. That His name should be mentioned in them. His name, Allah's name, should be mentioned in the masjid. And this, dhikru, ism rabbik, ism rabbina, this mention of Allah's name, the name of our master, some Sahaba interpreted this to mean the Quran itself. Because the best way to remember the name of Allah, sabbih isma rabbika al-a'la, fasabbih bismi rabbika al-azim, this is Quran. So they stop Quran from being taught. Stop Quran from being recited. Others believe this to mean that the houses of worship in the Christian and the Jewish communities were originally masajid. And then Allah's tawheed was refused in those masajid. It was stopped. So then Allah says that Allah's name was not allowed to be mentioned. And then the other thing is there is a sect among the Christians, and there's also a major population within the Jews who talk about God as someone who shall not be named. He who shall not be named, right? And they speak about how His name is so holy and so sanctified you can't even call him by his name. And so Allah says, who could be a worse wrongdoer than someone who refuses to allow for Allah's name to be mentioned, to remember. So Allah is basically alluding to the fact that this is one of the tricks of shaitan. You take away the, فَأَنْسَاهُمْ ذِكْرَ اللَّهِ, like the Quran tells us. Shaitan, إِسْتَهْوَذَ عَلَيْهِمُ الشَّيْطَانِ فَأَنْسَاهُمْ ذِكْرَ اللَّهِ. Shaitan basically wrapped them around his finger and made them forget the remembrance of Allah. So to convince them that Allah's name is so awesome, you shouldn't even say it. What an amazing trick. So, أُولَٰئِكَ مَا كَانَ لَهُمْ أَن يَدْخُلُوهَا إِلَّا خَائِفِينَ. These people, they deserve nothing else except that when they enter the masajid, they should enter in a state of fear. This has been again interpreted in multiple ways. One of them is that those masajid, they were supposed to be masajid, but now there's no mention of Allah in them. Instead of becoming a place of peace, those places become a place of terror and fear. What's interesting in Christian tradition, if you look at the architecture in Christian tradition, right? They stain their windows. You notice that in the Catholic tradition specifically. They keep light from coming inside. And they specifically design windows in a way that the only light that comes in is the one that shines on the statue of Mary or the statue of Jesus. So you feel like you're in the dark and the only light is over there. That's kind of the design structure of, the Christian, the church, the old church tradition. A lot of churches even today, there's no windows. Like some sects actually, they don't allow for the windows. Like Jehovah's Witness, if you notice one of their temples, you won't see any windows there. But what's really interesting is, one of the first things you'll notice, especially in classical church architecture, is it's terrifying. It's very dark, and dark stone, and large towers, and, dark corners, there's not enough light inside. So this is one thing that it may be alluding to. The other thing, the ulama that believe this ayah is talking about the mushrikun who stop people from entering the house of Allah. Allah is saying, no, they have terrified the believers. What they deserve is, they're the ones who shouldn't be allowed to enter the Kaaba, and if they do ever enter, they should be terrified. أُولَٰئِكَ مَا كَانَ لَهُمْ أَن يَدْخُلُوهَا إِلَّا خَائِفِينَ. In other words, the table should completely be turned. What Allah is alluding to here is, right now the Makkans are in charge of the Kaaba, but a time is coming where instead of the believers being afraid to go to Makkah, it will be the kuffar that will be afraid to go to Makkah. And so Allah says, مَا كَانَ لَهُمْ أَن يَدْخُلُوهَا إِلَّا خَائِفِينَ. It is not becoming of them at all to enter it except in a state of fear. لَهُمْ فِي الدُّنْيَا خِزْيٌ. For these people in this dunya, in the world, is humiliation, especially for them. So Allah guarantees in this ayah, for example, the humiliation of the mushrikun. It hasn't even happened yet. This is early Medina. They haven't been humiliated yet. This is actually, many even consider these ayat before the battle of Badr. So there's no physical humiliation even happening to the mushrikun yet. But Allah guarantees it already. لَهُمْ فِي الدُّنْيَا خِزْيٌ وَلَهُمْ فِي الْآخِرَةِ عَذَابٌ عَظِيمٌ. And in the akhirah they will have enormous, intense, great punishment. بارك الله لي ولكم في القرآن الحكيم ونفعني وإياكم بالآيات والذكر الحكيم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.